Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you've brought your power hammer and your sawhorse and some sort of saw, maybe a screwdriver, like a big screwdriver, to the Boob Tube Boys, because we are covering Forged in Fire, a show about forging in fire. And I say we because it's not just me, Manly Van Lee. I don't even really use that nickname anymore. I'm Van Lee. I'm also joined by Brian Vaughn. Welcome to the show, Brian Vaughn.
My name is Brian, and I will cut.
Spencer Hendricks is also here.
I'm here, but I forgot my saw.
Get out. You're done. No longer on the podcast.
Okay.
You know you're the saw guy, Spencer.
Yeah, no, it's a horrible
You're
mistake.
the only guy that even has one.
Well, Forged in Fire is an amazing show that we'll be covering. I'm curious to see what your guys' thoughts on it are going to be, but it's a reality competition and one where several people compete to make a blade and then people get voted off and et cetera, et cetera. And we're going to be talking about it at length today. And I just want to ask, before we really get started, Spencer, what did you know about blacksmithing or bladesmithing or any of that before you watched this show?
Not much, except that it looks cool in video games, and I always think a blacksmith would be a really cool profession to have. Having seen this show, it looks really hard.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't think I would want to do it at all.
Okay, so you're playing Skyrim, right?
Mhm.
And you got to go to a blacksmith more often than not. Who are you going to?
Well, any of them, but the guy who works at the Skyforge in Whiterun, Yorlin Greymane, has the greatest steel in all of Tamriel.
That's what I've heard.
So you go up there if you really want like a Skyforge steel sword.
He's pretty nice, too.
As long as you respect his craft, yes.
You join the companions.
I think that's probably a thing for bladesmith, which, by the way, let's get this out of the way. Is a bladesmith interchangeable with blacksmith? Because I had not heard of bladesmith before.
I don't think so, but in my notes, I just used words
Blacksmith?
randomly. No, I used both because I'm like, why not? But I don't know the true answer to that.
It's just that bladesmith sounds so cool.
Okay. Well, you know, I'm used to blacksmith, but I'll work on assimilating this into my vocabulary. In any case, I feel like every bladesmith, it's like a Rodney Ratcliffe situation. You have to, if you take their craft seriously, they're nice to you. Otherwise, they might hate you.
That's fair. Brian, did you know anything about bladesmithing before this?
Well, I mean, there's what I learned from A Song of Ice and Fire, you know, because Gendry the Bastard, he does some smithing alongside some other characters. But no, nothing at all that is of legitimate use.
Well, I'll tell the story of how I got into the show because I obviously picked it to cover, and I've watched probably 50-plus episodes of this show. I don't like reality TV. I never have. Katie, my girlfriend, however, does. And she, for whatever reason, has always loved bladesmithing, I guess we'll say.
She does it all the time.
It's a joke between us. She's like, well, you're going to get me a forge?
I wish you would.
If I knew how to get a forge. I don't know the first step to that.
You don't have to do that until the gold anniversary.
But I did have an idea because they do have gimmicky episodes on Forged in Fire where, for example, our next one we're covering next week has returning contestants who didn't win.
But are fan favorites for some reason or another.
We'll find out. But they also have ones like Beat the Judges or different novelty competitions. And so I had a thought of if we get Katie this forge, we could do one where I'm like the apprentice and it's like couples. So couples compete against one another. I think that could be interesting.
I think so too. I think you got to get this forge.
Do you think either of you could forge a blade?
No.
I would need a very hands-on instructor because I'm not good at any of the knowledge that goes into working with fire, like hammering something. I think I could do it, but you couldn't just tell me what to do and be like, all right, see you in an hour, because that wouldn't go well.
I think I could write a poem about forging a blade.
You'd be more of a bard type then.
Yes. Actually, I think historically that would be my role throughout society, just to kind of
as a bard,
roam from town to town singing of what I see, and then people running me off.
Fair enough.
So another thought, though, when you mention Game of Thrones and Gendry or whatever, is that George R. R. Martin references him as being ripped from all the blacksmithing work. What's going on? These guys are not ripped.
What do you mean?
You'll see some guys that have like farm strength,
right?
Who are just big guys.
Well, Will in this first episode we're doing this week, has
he's a
that.
farm strength guy.
He sure is.
That man is probably the strongest man I've ever seen.
He only knows 8 words, though.
No, and he is a barrel.
I do think if I were to bladesmith, blacksmith, whatever, I could get you a blade.
You would do well.
I think I could do, I think I could do it. The first so many times would not be good.
You think you'd pass the sharpness test?
Eventually, but right away, no, definitely. Actually, no, I do think I could pass that because I do sharpen my knives regularly.
It wouldn't like stay together or something.
No, it'd explode in the hand. Or
Actually,
it would have like
you would
handles
kill
in
Doug
weird places.
as he tried to do the cutting test. That's his name, right, Doug?
Yeah. Marcata.
I think this whole show was made so that guy can cut things.
Pretty much.
I think.
Van's ability to sharpen his own knives actually dates back to our very first test episode in Mad About You.
Yeah,
that
he
was
said
talked
that's-
about.
It's not so much sharpening as straightening, I believe is how he described
That's
it.
with those long stick things. That's what in television shows, everyone says, oh,
Yeah.
we're sharpening. That's not. You're straightening the blade. When you do that, you need a whetstone to sharpen.
I remember when you told me, Van, what those long stick things were. I was 34, probably. I didn't know. I've had them throughout my life, too.
I've used them and I felt like I was sharpening it in
Well,
my
yeah, and you
head.
can go clink, clink,
In
clink.
my head,
yeah.
and I was, because of all that Mad About You, I was thinking, wow, I'm sharpening the shit out of this thing right now.
Well, Forged in Fire, as I mentioned, is a competition reality show. It airs on the History Channel, which
Somehow.
it's one of those
It's a
things
loose
where
tie-in.
yeah, what is it like the Learning Channel and it's My Fat Life or whatever. Like that's every show there.
If a cable network sticks around long enough, it turns into another thing but retains the name. And the History Channel, because aren't they all now like Ancient Aliens, and bladesmithing, and like MTV is reality shows, and ESPN, I think, is porn.
They did stick the obligatory in the last section there, like, oh, in the 1300s, this sword was used to kill people in the Spanish War. Go make that. And then I think that was their way of being like, this is historical, see?
I love how tacked on the historical element is. It, to me, adds to the charm of this kind of like out-of-the-box reality competition that they just kind of tack weird booms and bangs over.
Yeah, it doesn't even really tie in. They're like, first of all, make your own hammer. Second of all, make this blade. It's going to be real shitty because you had to do it in 3 hours. Now, go home in 5 days and make this thing from history.
Yeah, you gentlemen from Cumberland, Maryland, make this blade that you could behead someone with.
Well, this show has become one of the network's biggest hits for the History Channel. And the idea behind it is that, of course, 4 blacksmiths from all across the country and sometimes the world. There was an international episode I watched.
That's cool.
France versus Poland versus Argentina versus the U.S.
Ooh, it's
Guess
getting
who
dangerous to where they might actually use their weapons in that case.
Guess who won? Who do you think won of those 4 nations?
The Polish
France.
person.
It was America. And it was just like some big, slow-witted, like nice southern goober.
Good.
Yeah, but France was in the finals too. Poland was a guy who called himself a troll because he was big and scary. He was a nice guy, but and I didn't call him a troll. He called himself a troll.
Like a doctor troll or a cop troll, a nurse troll. What kind of troll are we talking about here?
Blacksmith troll.
Sounds kind
Oh.
of terrifying, honestly.
Did he have a jewel in his belly?
Sure, of course.
Did he bladesmith a club?
He just starts bashing Dave Baker over the head with it.
In a way, bladesmithing is like metal whittling.
Wow, it sure is.
Yeah, that's a really good analogy, actually.
Spencer, do you know snakes are the ultimate tube? This is another thing that came out of Brian's mouth.
I'm going to write one of those books that they have in the checkout aisle that are like $5, and it's like, wit and wisdom from, and then it's someone no one's ever heard of, which would also be the case here.
Well, anyway, these blacksmiths are brought in from all across the world. They forge knives, swords, hatchets, all sorts of various steel weapons. And the show typically consists of 3 rounds. In the first of the rounds, there are 4 contestants who are given parameters to make a blade. And at the end of the round, the competition's judges analyze the blades presented, with the worst performer being eliminated from the competition. The second round, the remaining bladesmiths then refine their blade and add handles or whatever else the judges have requested. After this round, the judges put the finished blades through a series of bonkers tests, which include things like chopping up a bunch of dead fish or pigs or hacking at blocks of ice. The contestant whose blade that performs the worst or possibly breaks, they like to refer to it as catastrophic failure, they are then eliminated from the competition.
Big fan of the cutting of the pigs and fish and stuff like that.
Mhm.
That's another, like, they're doing it just for funsies.
Oh,
You
yeah.
could do this. You could test strength and sharpness probably by measuring something, and they're like, let's have this guy, this Doug guy with these fancy dance moves, just hack through some animals.
I'm telling you, that's why I feel like this whole show was built around Doug and his martial arts expertise. Do you think there are any people, like animal people, with objections to watching corpses get hacked in half?
I think the controversy might come from we're wasting food, but they're not. They actually take that and give it to the cast, and they eat the corpses they're hacking at. So I don't
They
think
eat
there
the
is a
corpses
problem with
as
it.
I actually watched the director's cut of this episode, and Will, after the episode, there's a little outtake of him walking up to one of the corpses and shoving his mouth right into it and just gobbling it up.
If anyone in that cast was going to do it, it's Will, definitely.
You could even cook that over the forge, I guess, and stick it in
See,
there.
it's perfect. They've got everything they need there. Dave Baker probably has like a salt shaker in his pocket.
Food and fire.
The two remaining competitors after that second round are then sent home to their own forge and given a challenge to recreate an iconic weapon from history. These weapons have included things like the Indonesian Chris sword, the Scottish claymore, the Ngombe Ngulu, or even Attila the Hun's sword of Mars. Which
Anybody
is a
ever make a
sword.
claymore or a gladius?
Gladius, huh?
Yeah.
Wow,
I know
you really
about-
looked up some definitions, didn't you?
I've known this stuff, despite what I said earlier.
You know all about the claymore because you know about that big Scottish wrestler guy.
Oh, yeah, that is why I know that, probably.
Mhm.
I thought
Yeah.
a claymore was a bomb, like something in the ground that
They're-
exploded.
They're like Metal Gear Solid, the little things with the sensory, and if you step in it, it explodes. There's that, but then a claymore sword is a big two-handed sword.
It's a lot different than a Copus or a Zephos.
You want to explain why?
We don't have that much time on the
Let's move
podcast.
on.
Let's get into the next. I could, though. You know I could.
The competitors are then given a handful of days to forge their sword or weapon, and at the end of the forging, they return to the Forged in Fire studio, where the judges do more batshit crazy things to the weapons, like, I don't know, smack a bunch of horse skulls with them. Eventually, they determine a winner. The winner is then awarded the title of Forged in Fire champion and given a check for $10,000. But of course, they are considered independent contractors, so you really only get like $6,000.
Yeah, maybe 6,800.
Because that tax method is better for the show than the contestants.
Right, and you just hope the show covers air travel.
They do, and they put them up in hotels and all that stuff. So that's good. I mean, what's the overhead on this show?
It cannot
Can't
be
be that
much.
much.
You rent out a warehouse, you get some decorations from TGI Fridays they're not using.
You get some middle-aged guys who like to swing things.
There's a lot of those. I might be one. Maybe not swords, but I could see myself wanting to swing something, like a golf club or a baseball bat.
And that's basically the gist of it. Now, before we move on to the episode we're covering today, let's discuss the cast, and it quotes here. And that basically includes the various judges and hosts of the show.
I'd love to.
First up is the original host of the show and the man whose name increases with each part, Will Willis. Don't like that name.
It's not a good name.
Bob Bobertson. Like, come on.
It's also one of those Will with one L,
Mhm.
like a Will Myers, the baseball player. That's not a name I like with a dropped consonant.
Fair
I
enough.
don't know why. I don't like it visually.
Doesn't look like it's finished.
No, I want it to keep going, and I feel like I should just call him Will instead of Will.
I thought you burped for a moment, so I was like, I'll let him say the line again. Yeah, no, the first name doesn't look finished. The last name looks like there's too much.
Yeah.
Willis.
And it only looks like there's too much because of the first name.
Mhm. Willis was born into a military family, and he became an Army Ranger and Air Force pararescue specialist. He hosted the show for seasons 1 through 7, and while no official reason has ever been given for his leaving the show after the 7th season, the rumor mill has stated that he was quite difficult to work with, and apparently once had a verbal spat with Doug Marcaida.
Oh,
How?
which not a good
How?
idea.
That guy's like so positive and nice. No, it's not a good idea, but I don't know how you make that guy mad.
So maybe Will Willis, ex-Marine, maybe he has some sort of hand-to-hand training. But Doug, he's in a room full of blades. He can do anything with a blade. He sets up obstacle courses just to hack them down. I love that guy.
Now, on the less sensationalized side of things, Will Willis also had a kid during that period. So a lot of people are saying he might have just left the show to be with his kid more. He's on the record for saying that he was kind of annoyed with how long it took to film this show because they take 3-4 hour rounds. The host just has to stand there and chat.
Be a
the
little
whole
boring, yeah.
But I mean, I'd take the job. But yeah, I kind of see that.
But look at the guys you get to chat with.
Every time I hear that, though, like they left their position to spend more time with family, that always sounds like bullshit. It always sounds like something
Yeah.
happened.
Because we wouldn't do that.
No,
No.
no one really does. It's always, it just seems like a euphemism.
Do you think his firstborn was part blade?
Which part?
Tang.
Oh, perfect.
You know, though, it might not be the Tang. It could be the Ricasso or the
Mhm.
Fuller,
Mm-hmm.
or perhaps the Central Ridge.
Yep. What about a clip point?
It could be that. It's on my... I mean, I know that.
See, all I can think now is kick plate, like from our shovel experience.
Or what was the this isn't on the podcast, but that horse movie we watched, the Technodrome,
Oh,
which is
yeah.
apparently a fantastic horse maneuver.
The hypnodrome or something?
Hypno-
I believe
Hypnotoad.
that is what it was. It must be some sort of dressage thing.
Did I say Technodrome? Because
You
that's
did.
the Ninja Turtles ball that drives around that Krang
Oh.
lives in.
That's why I didn't really bat an eye. I knew that it was something. It existed in pop culture.
Last bit on Willis here. His role in the show is basically the host. He just yells a bunch. He explains the rules, narrates some stuff, but it's mostly yelling. That's his job.
And then asking them to leave when their weapon doesn't hold up.
And I feel it's rude to ask them to surrender their blade.
Very almost ceremonial, like an army officer being dismissed or something. The way it's like, please surrender your weapon.
And what's funny is that's all for show, because after the show's over, the losers do get their blades
Well, I
back.
would hope so.
The winner, however, they do surrender their blade and it gets hung up on the wall.
Oh, okay.
It's pretty cool, though.
They should make an episode where there's a big thing where the loser won't surrender his blade and they have to all chase him down together.
He has to have a one-on-one fight with Doug with blades.
That Doug.
That Doug. Yeah. Well, he'd win that one.
This then brings us on to Will's replacement, a man named Grady Powell. He took over for hosting duties in season 8. We're not going to see him in our 2 episodes. We get Will both times, and we get the same judges both times, too. I won't spend a lot of time on Grady Powell, but he is a former Green Beret, and he's been on various other reality shows, including something called Dual Survival on the Discovery Channel. I don't know that one. Also doesn't sound like something I want to watch.
Well, is it duels with blades?
That would be better. Oh, by the way, there is a Forged in Fire spinoff called Knives or Death.
Yeah, but
I think.
they must just make spears in it.
So you know about it
Because
then.
Goldberg is the host of it.
Yeah.
And I found out about this on accident because I'm going to let you guys in on a secret. This is one of the shows where I did not do a lot of background
How dare
research
you.
on the show itself, but I did see on my Hulu home screen a big old picture of Goldberg, and it said Forged in Fire, Knife or Death. And yeah, I clicked on it. I wanted to know what it was.
The only other thing I can say about Grady Powell is that the guy looks like one of the absolute douchiest people you've ever seen. And I don't know if he really is that way, but when you see like a built buff dude, real muscular,
I hate
have
that.
like a and they have like a bitchy face and blonde hair,
Oh, yeah.
like white sandy blonde hair. You look like an asshole.
Is he Guile from Street Fighter?
He's pretty close, to be honest. He's got the military stuff too.
Oh man, and Guile is kind of a dick.
Oh, definitely. Moving on to the true stars of the show, we have the judges. First up is the guy who is largely responsible. You couldn't even get through it.
They're great. I love them all, honestly.
Yeah, the guy who's largely responsible for the historical accuracy of the weapons on the show. He is the so-called historic weapons recreation specialist, David Baker. Baker's a Hollywood prop maker, as well as a squat little Colonel Sanders of a man with a waxed mustache. He's got round glasses, and he's got a vest with a tie. He's kind of dapper overall.
If I were to read a description about David Baker beforehand and see Hollywood prop maker and be like, yeah, whatever, he's probably exaggerating. Then I see his face, the ultimate prop, and I thought he knows what he's doing.
And he actually started out as an actor. He had a few roles in television and movies.
Was he in Deadwood?
He was in St. Elmo's Fire. You guys know that one?
Yeah, that was the big 80s movie, right?
1985. He was also in The New Lassie, which was a TV show. Blood Trail 2, The Trail Home.
How did this turn into, I'm going to make weapons. I'm going to make props for movies.
Maybe it happened in whatever Blood Trail 2 is.
Well, his first role, too, was in a television series called Call to Glory. It was like a military show featuring none other than Coach's own Craig T. Nelson.
Okay.
But basically, he started getting acting jobs and somehow wound up in the prop making aspect of it, realized he likes bladesmithing or whatever, and then that's what he did.
Huh,
That's the
following
story.
the dream.
And overall, despite looking like someone who would tell you children should be allowed to work in coal mines for pennies, I do think he's a pretty cool dude. He's not the political proclivity you might think looking at him, and just seems like a nice guy.
He's one of these kind of, I don't know, he's got a little bit of that cowboy dandy to him that is kind of charming. I kind of found all the judges charming with their personal style choices.
He had some of the more stern responses when he was critiquing the weapons of the 3. It seems like the other 2 would be a little more gentle, and then he'd get it and look at it real seriously and then be like, oh my God.
Oh my God, you could never kill a Philippine warrior with this.
I will kind of add credence to him being the mean guy a little bit later on. There's a reason he was in this. He typically is not, but we'll save that for a second here. Because next up is edged weapons specialist Doug Marcaida, and he is a Filipino martial artist whose job on the show is to twirl around with the weapons, stab pigs, and all kinds of shit. Marcaida served 8 years in the U.S. Air Force. He has been a military contractor teaching his martial arts specialty, the Filipino fighting style of Kali. And much like Dave Baker, he just seems to kind of be a nice, cool dude. I like him.
With him, I totally agree. He seems very affable.
Has a lot of little affectations I enjoy. I like how he has the little soul patch and his...
It works for him.
For some reason. And he is wearing like a fleece with a zipper with nothing under it that he has unzipped a little too far. And again, it's kind of obnoxious, but because he's so nice, I'm like, yeah, whatever. This is probably how sword people are. Every subculture has people that are away.
Mm-hmm.
And there's kind of a little bit of Ren Fair bleed over with sword culture and kind of I'd like to bring back different eras in my style. I don't know. I found it kind of fun between the contestants and the judges and the host, looking at how everyone kind of had a style within different arenas that I could see bladesmithing going.
Yeah, and like, for example, Doug Marcaida is not a bladesmith. He doesn't make blades. He simply
sure as shit uses them.
He just picks it up and tells you if it'll kill or cut or whatever it is.
Whatever you need done with one, Doug Marcaida can do it with a blade.
He also owns Marcaida Kali, which is his martial arts training center in Rochester, New York. He has been a knife designer. He doesn't make them, but for several brands, including some things called Fox Knives Italy, K-Bar Knives, and Jason Knight Knives. Speaking of Jason Knight Knives, the man himself is our next judge. And ironically, he's not actually a full-time judge on the show. He was only in pretty much season 3 and then a little bit of season 4 because we do get him next week. He mostly fills in for another guy that we'll talk about here in a bit. Knight is referred to as an ABS mastersmith, and that's the American Bladesmith Society, FYI. He's the owner of Knight Forge Studio. He's basically just like a hawk. He just sits there like a hawk on his chair and waits for a vole to walk in front of him. Like, he's a very regal guy.
He
has
is.
kind of a long
kind of intimidating,
goatee.
honestly.
I found him the most intimidating of the 3 judges. He's never mean or anything, and he's often actually very complimentary, but his demeanor is less affable. So I just kind of found him, a little scary.
Mm-hmm.
He was the one who often you would think he was going to say something horrible, and he was like, good job. Like, you'd look at it really closely and seem like he hated it, and he'd be like, nice work.
He'd look at it for like 3 minutes and then be like, oh, your blade's perfectly fine. You did an awesome job.
There are
I
a
love
couple
you.
of times when he delivers a compliment, and it took me just a split second to realize it was a compliment.
Yeah, because his voice doesn't belie that it's going to be a compliment either. Then there's the face with the pointy eyebrows. I like him. I like every judge on the show.
They're great. I want to go make swords with them right now.
Those 3 judges are our ones that are going to be on the bench, quote unquote, for our 2 episodes. But there are 2 others in the course of the show that I would like to mention. First up is the man Jason Knight is filling in for. ABS mastersmith Jay Nielsen is his name. He's so badass, he doesn't even use a first name. He just goes by the letter J. That's not J-A-Y, that's just J. Dot.
Like he's Jay Massis from Dinosaur Jr.
Is that a band?
Yeah.
What's that one song they do?
They have a song. I know they actually had one song in like 1989 that was kind of popular.
T-Rex.
Yeah, and I think it's in it's in Rock Band.
Nielsen is basically just somebody's dad. Like, he's just a soft-spoken, soft-looking guy with glasses. He's got a stone-cold Steve Austin goatee. He was actually brought on the show to be the bad boy judge who tells it like it is.
Oh, no.
He supposedly is the meanest of all the judges, but also one big reason why I do love this show, we can get into this now, it's very positive.
It's a really nice show. I'll just say this now. A lot of the stuff that I've heard people say about the Great British Bake Off, I think applies to this show. I think it's a really well-intentioned show of people who pursue a craft trying to do a good job of it and mostly being complimented for their troubles.
And all of the people competing against each other seem to enjoy each other's company, too. Like, they all talk a little bit while they're waiting for their handles to harden in some cases or whatever, and they are rooting for each other's swords to work out, too.
You could give me 10 more minutes an episode of the contestants palling around.
I would love that.
I want that.
I wanted to see more of their thought process and their designs and how they draw up things. That was the most interesting thing to me, is what they're thinking when they tell them the design on a weapon, how they draw it out and plan it. The design part is super interesting, how that happens.
The design and kind of the interaction and learning about this process, I think, are the interesting parts. And this applies more in the next episode, but leave the jokes to people doing podcasts about the show, please.
The difference really is that most American reality shows just have like a Gordon Ramsay there saying, you're fucking stupid.
A Simon
you fucking
Cowell.
failed. And I hate that. That's why I hate reality shows. This is not that way. And Nielsen, by the way, as the mean judge, is funny because he's not really that mean in the end. But because he's not here, I feel like one of them felt they needed to step up and be the mean judge. Maybe that was just Dave Baker.
That could be. Yeah, because it's not like any of them really seem like that's how they were,
Mhm.
but there is an element of that came out here and there.
So Nielsen is mean in a Roger Klotz sort of way, like
Yeah.
pretty innocuous.
Sure. And lastly, we have Ben Abbott.
That guy rules at Blades.
He is very, very good. He's a 9-time Forged and Fire champion turned judge. He's the only member of the judges who has never been beaten in Forged and Fire. He's a dopey-eyed Englishman who just simply does a good job with everything. He's really sweet and nice and always has good things to say and does a good job. It's fascinating to see these guys on this show that are all like that.
They put that Abbott guy in the in these competitions with the other people that won against the other judges. Just
He wins
doesn't
every
lose.
time.
He beats all the other
I
ones.
wonder why he's so good at it. What's Ben Abbott? What's his secret?
I have a theory.
Okay.
So he's an English guy,
hmm
really good at making swords. Probably like one of the Knights of the Round Table.
You know, it fits if we were
Mhm.
500 years ago or something or other.
Shit, I didn't realize that part. Didn't think about it.
The girlfriend and I watched one of those Beat the Judges episodes, which I think that was actually a spin-off, where they would have contestants go through the process, and then in the final round, it wasn't contestant versus contestant. It was contestant versus one of the judges, Ben Abbott, Dave Baker, or one of the other ones I can't think of
They
right
never
now.
have to versus Doug in a fight, though, right?
No, that would maybe that's in that Knives and
And
Death show.
Doug doesn't have to compete, right?
No.
Because he doesn't know how.
Yeah, he's not a bladesmith, so no. But anyway, we watched it, and it was one where they were going up against this Ben Abbott guy, and the whole time, Ben Abbott was flawlessly doing all this stuff. He had a perfect blade, but they have to ratchet up the tension a little. So he was like, oh, I don't know, my blade went really well when making it, but, you know, there's always a chance a shark could eat it, so I might lose. I don't know.
And in the background, of course, the music is rising to the occasion like it's an actual concern.
Mhm.
I love that about this show, too. Every single dilemma is cute. It's not really a problem.
I don't know. The guy from the next week made every little ordeal
Oh,
a
yeah,
massive
well,
drama.
I don't even want to say anything about that guy yet because I have a lot to say about him next time.
Man.
Well, with the cast taken care of, it's time to get into this episode of Forged and Fire. We're covering Season 2, Episode 4, The Falcata. And they always name the episodes
Sounds
after
like
the final
sounds
weapon.
like a cheese.
I'd eat
Makes
it.
me want to eat some cheese.
I'd eat a real Falcata.
You could-
Falcata. Fartcata? Huh.
You could cut Falcata cheese with a Falcata sword.
Beautiful.
I bet Falcata would be a real sharp cheese because
Go on.
swords, but cheese can be sharp too.
Mm-hmm.
And
I like sharp cheese personally.
I do too.
Oh, it's the best. Well, the show begins as it always does with a CGI flaming hot sword, and it's stamped with the title of the show into the blade, and it's epic battle music and everything. It's like get you in the mood.
And
right
it's
out of the
only like
gate.
10 seconds long, but mainly it's just a delivery system to tell you what the show's deal is.
And they use it 10 to 15 times an episode.
Yeah.
Commercial breaks.
Like going into and coming back from the breaks.
I'd like all of that replaced with all the Blade people hanging out and like having coffee together.
Well, one of our contestants next week will be having coffee. We know that.
They really played that up quite a bit.
From there, we get a view of the forge with stuff hanging from the walls. There are 4 anvils in the middle of the room, and the voice of our first contestant begins to ring out. And we hear all about Frank Christensen, who says he's been bladesmithing for 10 years and is so ready for this competition.
No, he's not.
Giddy. He's giddy, Spencer. Now, which of you two would like to be the first to describe Frank Christensen?
Yeah, I don't think I can. Go ahead, Brian.
Uncle Pennybags with a little bowler hat on.
Mhm.
I found him, I wanted to hug him up.
Yeah.
I want him to be my little grandpa.
I mean, he was super wholesome. I will say that about Frank. He had too much confidence, as we'll get into, but he just seemed like a sweet guy.
Out of the gate, I liked him. I will tell you why I didn't like him once we get a little bit into this.
there are
Too smug.
reasons that present themselves,
Yes.
but at this juncture, when I'm
Love
first
him.
seeing the guy, he also has a nice smile, if that makes sense. Now, it's obscured behind a thicket of mustache.
Oh, well, yeah. So that's just mustache, right? Because it goes down quite a ways.
It's possible he's got extensions.
like a Fu Manchu.
Hey,
It's like a Yosemite Sam sort of thing almost.
It just occurred to me, is that a thing?
What?
Yeah, you got hair
Mustache
extensions
extensions.
are a thing, or facial hair extensions. Does that get done in Hollywood or anything?
I
Sure.
could see it in that scenario, but
I think
but
Paul
like,
Rudd had one in Ant-Man.
Well, from what
you
I
said
heard,
it so confidently, I bought it for
I mean,
a while.
haven't you seen the Fu Manchu that he has in Ant-Man? All ants have a Fu Manchu.
especially fire ants, they wear sunglasses. I heard that Paul Rudd also had to be distended for Ant-Man to make him the size of an ant.
Method
tough.
acting. It's tough.
It's tough.
Well, I think that Frank Christensen looks like he's about to finance the Donner Party from the comfort of the bank he owns in some dirt town in Kansas. He just has that bowler hat, big blacksmithing apron, bushy walrus mustache. He's great.
If he were to tell you about his dino park and say he spares no expense, that also would not surprise me.
Oh, and by the way, as the episode chugs along and we watch the contestants work, we often cut to talking head segments with the contestants, and they'll talk about what's going through their head at that moment or offer insight into their work. So really going forward with this, it's not going to be the same as most of our shows because, I don't know, I can't be like, and then Kelly wanders over to the hammer. So we'll just cover little bits and pieces.
It's going to be a lot looser. My note-taking process was like that for these. It's just kind of, when they're actually working, it was like, well, I can't really describe this.
I did have a note about how this episode kind of fell in love with having Kelly in slow motion for a little while. Apart from that, no, it's they started banging on their blades a little bit, and that's what happened.
Like, whoever the editor is has to do something, I guess. So they're like, I don't know, I guess let's slow-mo this. Why? I don't know.
They do a lot of it, but then they'll also do sped up stuff where they'll go slow-mo, where they walk for a moment, and then they zip over because they've sped it up.
I wanted them so badly on the, like, fake moments of manufactured concern to go black and white on the screen.
They reserve that for next episode when they're talking about the previous episode
past.
the contestants were on the past.
Right.
Yeah. Though they do like to do colors because what they'll do is when they explain something that's coming up, like one of the challenges, they'll say, we're going to test your weapon in a pig snort or whatever. They'll show an image of Doug pig snorting, but they make it like blue so that way you can't tell whose weapon he's holding because you don't want to be spoiled.
That's a
as to
good
who
point.
wins.
I didn't realize why they did that. I thought it might just be to make Doug look even more badass.
Well, next up is Will Bagley. He's a 19-year-old competitor who has possibly the worst haircut I've ever seen in my life. I mean, if I see a bad haircut in a show we're covering, 30% chance I just ignore it.
I think that he was born with that, and
You think
I
that's
don't
his
think
born hair?
I don't think it grows or changes. I think that's just his head.
It's like a form-fitting bowl cut that maybe you tried to cut it with like a saw or a angle grinder.
It's pretty snug for a bowl cut, but yeah, there is something just off about it. And jarring about his face, he doesn't have
Has a
much
chin beard.
expression either. Like, yeah, his beard drove me nuts.
Bad beard.
It's too snug on the jawline, too high on his face. It doesn't go down in his neck at all. But
Or up on his face. It
that's
just kind
true.
of
yeah,
is,
it's like a little strip, just
Yeah.
a tiny little strip along his jaw.
He's pretty hairy.
yeah.
You can see the hair everywhere.
One of the things I admired about Will,
He just let that out.
I couldn't do that.
the upper arm
'Cause I'm
hair
hairy.
is thick. It's real good. I was really impressed that he didn't care. Great for him.
And I don't know. I mean, this is probably being too judgmental, but from the way he looks to the slow pace that he talks in, to his southern accent, he just looks like one of those guys who was like a bully in high
Hey,
school.
he looks like Chris Groves.
Oh my God, I had the exact thought.
Yeah, he sure does.
And it was, once I drew that association, it was just hard to like him the rest
Yeah.
of the way. It was like he's too much like Chris Groves.
Well, Chris Groves is a guy we all used to know who is in prison for doing terrible things.
So he looks like that guy, but he doesn't really act like that guy.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know him, and I don't know if he's a cool dude or not. There's another little bit later on he explains that makes me go, oh, so you're not a cool dude, but we'll get into that when we get into it. Anyway, he says he's here to prove that age ain't nothing but a number because he is obviously quite young, 19 years old, and he wants to show how good he can be despite his lack of years and experience.
I think another one of the things that makes Will a little more difficult to like is that he very much seems Ozarkian. If you were to tell me he was from the area we are currently in, and I would believe you 100% right down to the accent.
And if you just happened across a guy like, say, I don't know, say you were his coworker or something, because none of us would have a friend like that. But if you were just around a person like that and they were to tell you, I make swords, you'd be like, yeah, of course you do. You would believe that.
And then I probably would say, I haven't really felt like talking to you before, but now I do have a few questions. Have you ever been on Forged in Fire?
Kelly Vermeer Vela is our third contestant, and she's a farrier. That's a horse worker person.
Horse
They make
person, yeah.
The shoes for horses or whatever, Reeboks and so forth.
Beela's.
She's also a part-time blacksmith, of course, and she says she's not professionally trained and is self-taught. And then there's a little joke here because she has a book, I guess, about blacksmithing. I'd read that book.
I was not sure what she meant. Like she's been educated by a book,
Yeah.
or she wrote a book.
No. I think it's like I'm inexperienced, but I mean, I read a book.
I mean, I did read one book,
Yeah.
yeah. But you get a sense of Kelly right away. She's kind of pretty straightforward and knows what she's doing.
She looks like if you made her mad or just said hi to her, she'd punch you in the face.
Mm-hmm. She's very gruff.
Yeah, very no nonsense. Although you see as the episode goes on that's not at all how she is.
That's kind of the theme of Forged in Fire for me is hey, you know what? You can't judge everybody by their gruff exterior. Sometimes they make swords and wear a bunch of leather and belts and belt buckles, but they're still nice.
Our final contestant is Justin Jones, who's a very pink man. He says he's been blacksmithing for 6 years, but also that he doesn't have a power hammer or a press, makes all of his blades by hand, so I'm assuming that's significantly harder than using the thing they call Big Blue, where you step on it and it goes bump, 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 bump.
I love this guy. This is another contestant I really like for whatever the reason. Because of that, Justin is kind of consistently like, well, I don't really know. I've never really had any of this kind of fancy equipment before. Oh, wow, I guess I'm good at this.
He does kind of waffle a little bit, too. Like, he'll be like, I think I did a good job. And then the next thing he'll be like, I'm not sure if that's going to work.
He was relatable to a person like me a little more, just because he didn't always feel self-assured. And he was like a 40-year-old guy who looked just like a guy. He did not have a specific smithing style. He wore plain t-shirts and jeans.
He was just some dude, yeah.
Actually, of this initial group we got this week, I really felt Kelly was the most like, I mean, maybe Will, but Will looks more like he works on just a farm, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
Looks like a farmhand. Kelly looks like that's a no-nonsense bladesmith right there.
Okay. Did you guys right away have someone in your head you thought would win?
I knew Kelly was going to succeed.
So did I.
I knew it.
I thought I had her picked as my winner.
I didn't necessarily think she would. I wanted her to.
Me too.
And I'll touch on this.
Honestly, I love Kelly. I'm just going to say that now.
Good. Well, I had this bit set up for next episode, but we can talk about it here. Bladesmithing, blacksmithing, whatever you want to call it, is a white man's game because it's an expensive hobby. It's a hobby that you have to have wealth, you have to have land, you have to have all this stuff. So 98% of the contestants on this show are going to be white males. And I remember seeing something on Reddit where, because yes, there's a Forged in Fire subreddit that I'm part of, and I'll probably share this show on it. But anyway, I remember seeing someone say something like, what's the deal? Why do they do that? And I don't think anything malicious by the show. It's the fact that it's just a hobby that people of color or women tend not to do. That's not to say they can't do it. And Kelly proves that this episode, spoiler alert, but I think that's really what's going on here.
Absolutely. Next episode exhibits a lot of what you're saying even more, Van. I think we see the kind of, niche industry that this can be for people with money, as well as people who have a legitimate, probably interest in the technique from birth or whatever. Like, we see people with some really nice home equipment. That struck me from this episode on, though, is, wow, you would have to be pretty loaded to even get into this hobby.
Yeah, and most of them, like the 10 grand isn't really going to do much.
I don't think that's really that much considering how much work they're putting into all this either. To me, that's not going to be the biggest motivator for any of these people is the money.
But the 10 grand is a better prize than fucking Great British Bake Off, which doesn't pay. That show makes money hand over fist, and they don't pay their makes me mad.
That is ridiculous. I guess they figure, but you get the exposure. You won the Great British Bake Off, so now you can open a restaurant or something, a bakery.
I think it's kind of fucked up at the end when they ask them to surrender their cake.
Well, anyway, because of all that, I tend to root for the non-white male if they pop up, just because you don't see them very often. So right away I saw Kelly and I went, man, it'd be awesome if a woman could win this, and we'll see.
We will.
While the competitors introduce themselves, we watch them stomp into the forge, and they do things like cross their arms or put their backpacks down, all before they stand in front of one of the 4 anvils in the room. With everyone assembled, Will Willis, the host, begins to explain the process and introduce the judges, all while having a haircut like that I Think You Should Leave sketch where Tim Robinson gets a dog haircut. That's what he looks like.
It is very curly this episode and very straight the next episode.
So you know he put effort into straightening it this time, or curling it this time, or perhaps straightening it next time.
One of these times he put a lot of effort into it.
After introducing the judges and letting them have a second to give a little hand signal, Will moves on to this particular contest's special rules and knife parameters. Let's hear what they are.
On the anvils in front of you is a bar of high carbon steel that you will use the forged blade in your signature style, but with a hidden tang. A hidden tang is fastened inside the handle material, so it's not visible on the surface of the handle. Sounds easy enough, right? This is Forged in Fire, I'm sure you're thinking, what's the twist? If you look around this forge, you'll see all the tools and equipment you need to accomplish this task, with one exception. We've removed all of the hand hammers in the forge. Instead, you'll have to forge your own hammers using these.
Ain't no hammers.
I hate it.
Gotta make your own hammers.
I hate it. That takes away from the purpose of what they're trying to do.
I had to rely on the musical cues, not knowing anything about smithing for when anything was supposed to be a problem. When Will Willis delivers and hammers, I kind of sat there not knowing how to react until the music. Da-da-da.
Oh no, I figured this out like 30 minutes into the episode when they were all talking about how, they have to have the hammer to make it. Putting that together at the beginning here, they've taken away a vital tool to their process. I don't like it. Dumb, gimmicky.
And by the way, on the table beneath the cloth, Will Willis has now whooshed away. They had some hidden stuff on there. It's just big rectangular hammer chunks. So they got to use those to make their hammers.
What a gross sounding phrase, hammer chunks.
After Kelly makes some jokes about it being mean that they took her toys away, aka hammers, and I believe that woman's toys are hammers.
I do too.
When she was a child, she played with hammers.
Even then.
Well, have you heard about her brothers and what they've done in the Mushroom Kingdom?
They've got infinity hammers, Brian.
You can't stop them, or I never could.
Will explains then that after completing their weapons, they will be tested via a coconut chop, which is precisely what you think it is, and a hot water bladder slice test, which might be precisely what you think it is. I'm not sure. I still don't know what a hot water bladder slice test is.
I know what they are now, but I still couldn't tell you what they're for. What the practical application of a hot water bladder is.
I want to see if
Slicing.
I want to see if anyone can make a blade that slices into it, because
Apparently
no
not.
one did. It must be really tough.
Before we get into the actual start of the competition, let's go ahead and take a quick break here. When we get back, we'll hear Will Willis shout a bunch, hammer noises, and fireballs. The usual.
Fireballs.
Will Willis tells the contestants that their time starts now. And he does this every episode where he'll say it like that. And then as he says now, he quickly shuffles back to his little spot where he stands. It's almost like he's trying to fight with himself to do it. And the time starts now. Like
or
that.
maybe there are rules we don't know about where he can't be on the court for more than 10 seconds.
Force field or something, sure.
The hosts, they have to be so serious about the role that it would be so hard not to fuck with them and be like, when? When does it start? And he would not take it well. He'd be like, now.
At this, the 4 contestants begin scurrying about, grabbing rectangular hammer chunks and some brown paper to draw pictures of their knives on. And the competitors take turns explaining the type of blade that they are making. We end up learning that Frank is making a Japanese-style tanto, which he says is a real good chopper. I'll take his word for that one.
Yeah.
Justin says when he was thinking about what blade he wants to make, he could only think of his good friend Colonel Jim Bowie. He's going to make a Bowie knife.
Oh, is that who that's named after?
He was like a frontiersman or something. I think he was a colonel.
I knew it wasn't after the musician David Bowie.
Contestant Will keeps bringing up how he's a lot younger than the other contestants, and he wants to win to prove a point. Then he reveals his knife is going to be a kukri because he makes a lot of them, and that means they're his bread and butter, I guess. That's what he says. His words, not
He
mine.
eats them every day.
You use your bread and butter to spread bread and butter. Knife time.
Will really was insistent that it was important to finally, for people with youth to get some other victory in life.
Kelly also has called upon her friend Colonel Jim Bowie. She's planning on making her blade straight, sharp, and hard.
Which to me seemed like a good strategy for something you want to cut through coconuts.
Host Will says the 10-minute design phase has come to a close, and the 3-hour forging time begins now. Spencer, I'm sorry, but this is your favorite part, but it's done. Can't draw anymore.
I wish the whole show had been just about them designing it, and you don't really see what happens afterwards.
It just ends at that point.
That's it.
I'd watch
I
it
bet
still.
Frank's over there drawing his own little Far Side comic.
With knives.
With the forging period beginning now, all of the competitors frantically rush off in different directions. The blacksmiths all have varying degrees of success with forging their hammers, because remember there's that stipulation at the beginning here.
Stupid.
Kelly and Justin chop off a bunch of their hammer chunk, but it takes a full half hour for them to get this accomplished. Meanwhile, old derby hat Frank, it just takes a steel pole, welds it to the back of the hammer chunk, and he's off to work on his knife, while Will does a similar thing and just welds his together. Although Frank did, I guess, what's called a dog head hammer. Look it up. I don't know, because it looks like a dog head, whereas Will, the contestant, took the hammer chunk and stuck the thing you hold on to in the middle of it, whereas Frank's is at the end.
Will and Frank had similar approaches, though, in that I want to get this done as quick as possible.
Mhm.
Justin decided he would like to take most of his time making a hammer.
I could see doing that.
I would, too.
If you have to start with the most important part, the tool that makes the blade, Want to make it pretty.
And Justin's rationale is that he's not used to big power tools, so he needs to have a really good hammer to use.
And in fact, contestant Will says his hammer is like Thor's hammer, other than the fact that it doesn't look like Thor's hammer or shoot lightning bolts out of it. It's pretty much the same thing, though.
Pretty funny.
Will's trying here.
He gave it a shot.
He has one delivery, and it is flat as fuck.
I will also say, too, I can see that guy watching lots of Marvel movies.
Oh,
I bet
yeah.
you he loves all of them.
Which character do you think he identifies with most?
Probably Ant-Man. We already brought him up. He's got that mustache.
What about the Incredible Hulk? Because Will's green.
Which one? You got Edward
He's shaped
Norton.
a little like Incredible Hulk.
What's the new
Eric
one?
Bana was one for now.
Mark Ruffalo.
Oh yeah, Mark Ruffalo currently. Lou Ferrigno.
Every time they pan over to Frank, the Old West banker, he's got the most unsettling grin on his face. And I think he looks like a comic book villain at times. You guys were like, this is a charming smile. I think it's a sinister smile. I would not want that man sitting across the room looking at me and smiling like that.
He just looks so much like a cartoon that
He
it's
really
hard
does.
for me to be afraid of him. In the same way that I could be afraid of Judge Jason Knight, because, he looks like a human that's intimidating.
Eventually, host Will yells a bunch about how much time they have left because that's 90% of his job. We see where everyone is with their knife steel, and it's mostly coming along well for everyone. Will the hairy kid does something that is very much a no-no, however, and he kind of partially quenches his blade in water,
Which
not oil.
even I knew not to do that.
You can't do that. It's going to make it crack. There'll be cracks and warps and smurfs, whatever else happens to a blade in water. The judges, of course, pitch a fit every single time this happens on the show, and they do here.
And this whole section, each round, kind of an issue needs to be established for each active
Right.
contestant so that we know that there are stakes and there is drama.
And Kelly's out here hammering the shit out of everything, and the judges talk about how being a farrier has really prepared her for this challenge because, as we all know, horses are judgmental as fuck and demand perfection, so it fits. The judges also comment about Justin's tip on his blade, which is too thin. Dave and Jason mentioned that they're going to be doing a coconut chop, and you don't want to lead blade when you're chopping, right? Am I right?
Duh.
When you're chopping cokes.
You guys like
Sea nuts.
coconuts?
No, I don't. I wish
like
I did,
coconut.
but I don't.
It's a texture thing for me. I just can't chew it. It won't go away.
Yeah, like coconut flavored things I can somewhat handle, but yeah, just like the white flesh, no thank you.
I'm okay with it.
While they're discussing all of this coconut chop stuff, we see Justin lightly tapping his hammer on the blade, and I'm not certain he's actually doing anything at all. He's kind of just wiping at it, and it's clearly he's trying to refine, but it's kind of goofy to see him over there hunched over this red-hot blade like, tap, 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 tap.
A lot of Forged in Fire has the Baywatch element of when people need...
Uh-huh. Keep going.
Everybody's super hot.
Hobie's here, yeah.
Hobie's getting in trouble. No, that everyone on the show, when they're actually doing their job, it's a little less exciting than you would think. The actual actions, the physical motions are pretty commonplace.
Frank has the opposite problem of Justin with the lean blade. His blade is super thick.
Oh.
He mentions he prefers it that way before he quenches, because that way if there are cracks or anything in the blade, he'll have enough material left to grind away the bad parts. And
Blade's a
go from
real
there.
hog.
Contestant Will puts a bunch of clay on the spine of his blade, and the idea behind this is that when he goes to heat it up and quench it, it will not harden the spine as much as it does the edge of the blade. So that way, when they do these bizarre chops or whatever, there's not so much resistance that it cracks the blade. But after he does quench it, he has a problem. When he pulls his blade out of it, it's warped really bad, and that's a problem. You can't turn in a warped blade, guys.
Yeah, that blade was telling a bunch of non-PC jokes, and it was buying all its shirts from Hot Topic and Spencer's Gifts. It's a warped blade, man.
The show also uses this opportunity to, of course, ratchet up the tension, go to commercial, where we get to see that CGI glowing sword, and bam, it stamps Forged in Fire in. Probably the fifth time already, but it's important to point out that it's there.
It really drives home how many commercials there must be in network shows now.
Because we watched yo-ho-hoed versions of the episode, and they didn't have commercials, so it was just straight through. Returning from that break, contestant Will does explain that this is a bad situation. He's got that warp in the blade, but his daddy taught him a lesson long ago, which he then took to heart.
My daddy told me if you're going to be stupid, you got to be tough, and I get in a lot of stupid situations. One time I was in the backyard shooting my AR-15 and I accidentally shot myself in the knee.
And I've learned why I didn't like this guy.
Right. Van, you foreshadowed earlier that there might be an upcoming reason to not like Will, and here it is. He's just shooting an AR-15 for fun in his yard.
Backyard.
That is the whole fucking problem?
And then he shoots himself. Anyway, Frank and Justin quench their blades without issue. Kelly quenches her blade and has a tiny bit of a bend, but it's not anything she can't fix in round 2. And then contestant Will goes back for quench number 2 to hopefully straighten his blade out, and it turns out fine. You know, again, they come up with these things in each round. By the end of it, it's usually not an issue.
Blade went to therapy, not talking back to its parents anymore, not warped any longer.
Host Will yells a countdown where we're shown all the contestants as they spend their final moments working on their blades, with the exception of Frank, who is instead doing that creepy smile and staring at the other contestants as they finish up.
I'm at the point in my notes where I realize what it is about Frank that made me like him. He looks like Yoda to me.
I get it. He's kind of short. He seems
frog-like.
He seems like he knows stuff that
He's
other
been
people
around.
don't.
He's been in the Dagobah system.
Yoda has that derby on.
You can tell he's been in swampy environments much of his life.
Frank mentions how perfect he thinks his blade is and how great of a job he did. And finally, with the time completed, the contestants stop to face the judges. Justin is told his blade may not be too thin, actually, and Dave Baker says, hey, it feels good to hold.
It's more the motion of the ocean.
Jason Knight compliments Kelly on her grind lines and says she knows what flat is because the grind lines are good, so flat. Blades are flat, guys. It's
What
good.
you want, I guess.
Contestant Will is told by knife-swinging Doug Marcaida that his blade has a nice design and a good feel, but Jason Knight kind of criticizes Will for getting his blade too hot in the forge, which could weaken the thing overall. You're supposed to get up to a certain temp, then quench it, not get past that temp, because it'll melt.
Again, all of this has a lot of parallels to cooking.
And finally, Frank, with his super perfect blade, he's told by Jason Knight a couple of positive things to boost this old man's spirits, but then the metaphorical hammer drops. There are a lot of tiny cracks in his blade. Knight says it looks like a lightning storm. You see what I did with the hammer drops thing?
Yeah, that really tickled me because, I mean, you have to also specify this hammer's metaphorical.
Correct.
Because we talked about 90 literal hammers.
With a brief transition, host Will says that with the deliberation complete, it's now time for one of the contestants to be banished from the forge.
Okay, right now, who did you guys think was going to be eliminated?
I thought it'd be Frank.
They made it look pretty clear there. In
Yeah.
fact, I wish that they decided it was so obvious. No, we don't need to go to break. Frank, get out. Get the fuck out. This sucks.
The first elimination comes so soon after Will's AR-15 reveal that I also was bummed I knew he wasn't getting canned.
Mm-hmm.
I figured Will would go sooner or later, but yeah, the way they acted with Frank's and how they zoomed the camera in on it, I was like, okay, he's the one who made the biggest mistake. And it's super funny because 2 minutes ago, Frank's like, I couldn't have done a better job. They're like,
I
Frank,
guess
get out.
this is my dream come true. He basically is saying stuff like that.
I've already won. Yeah, with a tense pause, host Will reveals the blacksmith leaving the forge today is, of course, Mustache and Derby Frank. Jason Knight reveals it was a pleasure to watch Frank stare at the other contestants, but the cracks in his blade are the reason he's being sent
They
home.
doomed him.
Frank nods and says he understands. He turns in his blade and says, shit happens. But he's not taking this as a failure, guys. He says the first thing he'll do when he gets home, hug his wife,
Hot.
head back out to the forge to start anew.
Even hotter.
And then with some slow motion walking footage combined with sped up walking footage, Frank wanders his way down a hallway, I guess, and just off into the world, never to be seen again.
This is our first shot of the execution hallway where all the contestants are sent down after they have to leave the show. And you get a good glimpse of like the person's mood as they're leaving. But what's really funny, and unlike some of the reality shows we've watched, these are not performer types. These are craftsmen. When they exit or when they're standing still being evaluated, they are not poised. They are fidgety. They're awkward.
I like that.
I love it. Yeah,
It's realistic.
They walk weird, and it really, again, it makes me like every single person more. So
I agree. Towards the end, even the ones that annoyed me, I kind of felt some compassion for them.
same here.
And Frank, by the end, because I didn't really care about him most of the episode, but by the time we got to this part where he's talking about, I'm not going to lose my spirit, I'm going to go home and hug my wife, which is the most like Sunday morning newspaper sort of. It's so Disney.
Wholesome.
Yeah, it's incredibly wholesome. And the fact he said that, he's like, I'm going to hug her and get right back to work. I was like, oh, that's a nice attitude, Frank. Good job.
I like to think, by the way, that this forge, the main one, is in like Siberia. They fly them in, drop them in.
Underground.
Yeah, and then like when they lose, they have to walk through the Siberian tundra to escape. So they just die. Most contestants who don't win die.
And then eventually you get captured, but you're in the cell next to Natalia.
Oh, yeah, so you can get out. You just have your watch that's magnetic.
Yeah, it gets the key from the guard.
Mm-hmm. Will next addresses the competitors, explaining that in round 2, they will be adding handles to their blades. The requirements, of course, are for a hidden tang, only there's one other stipulation this time. They must use scales to create their handle. Now, this is instead of like a big block of wood you drill a hole in and stick the tang into, you have to take these little flat rectangles, stack them together to make your handle.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
What are these scales, which I guess are pieces of what you would normally just be using to make a handle, to carve out a handle? What are they normally used for?
Well, handles, but it's just different methods. They're just saying you are forced to use this method to make a handle.
You need to do this more difficult thing.
And they're often made of epoxy or different types of wood, of course, but that's really the gist of it. And this is, of course, tougher because you don't just have a sturdy piece of wood or something to make the handle out of. You have a bunch of little pieces that, if you leave a gap in, there's a weak spot. So they could break a lot easier. And it's just more difficult overall to put them together. As Will says, "Good luck, bladesmiths. Your time starts now." And then he scampers off screen. The 3 remaining contestants all rush off in different directions like cockroaches when you turn on the light.
I would love it if Will, one episode, trips running back to the judge table and they left it in.
Or he's got he hits his head on something, so he's got a bandage on for the rest of the episode.
And he's clearly has a concussion and it just isn't making sense.
I guess there was one episode where Dave Baker, the judge, had something get in his eye. This isn't during the episode. So he had eye surgery to remove it, had to film the next day, so he's just in an eye patch. And they didn't bring it up. They just had him in an eye patch. So people on the internet were like, why is Dave Baker wearing an eye patch?
And I get it. I wouldn't have said anything either, because for Dave Baker, that could be a fashion accessory.
Could be. He leans more into pirate at that point.
Because he is a couple of choices away from pirate.
Yeah.
With his mustache. He has kind of a Satan thing going on with his goatee.
That's true, like a Faustian mustache.
A friendly devil.
Kelly says her plan at this point is the chased by a bear plan, where you just need to be faster than your friend who then is eaten by the bear.
Or Doug Marcata in this case.
Well, she's not going to go for the best blade. She's just saying, I want to be better than one person. So I guess that's admirable. Great job. Go for it. And you advance. It's perfect. She spends her time early in the round sanding and shaping her blade. Justin starts working on his handle using brass, and contestant Will is going to use carbon fiber for his handle because it's the first thing that just falls into his fat hands. And he decides to just glue a bunch of them together to make a block. And then Kelly finds something called burl. I don't know what burl is, but she sure says it. Brian, you know all this shit, apparently.
Burl Ives, the musician. It's pieces of his bones.
Oh, that'll be
sturdy. Awesome.
Real sturdy. And also, this is going to be worth a lot more because it's made of burl. I like that all 3 contestants have the same game plan from the first round. Kelly, slow and steady wins the race. I know what to do. Workmanlike approach. Justin, I'm going to take a whole lot of time on this one little detail, which is the brass guard in round 2 here. Will, what did I find? I'll just use this.
I like, too, that it ends up being that his handle is essentially not a handle. It just barely does cover the end of the sword, whatever. Yeah, It barely covers it to where it's almost poking out from the handle. And he spends, 5 minutes on it? He's done so early in this round.
When Will reveals that approach, I know nothing about any of this. I, watching my TV, said, well, I don't think that's going to work.
Well, contestant Will, he does. He chops off a bit of his tang, which is much to the consternation of the judges. But then he slathers just a bunch of glue on the handle, sticks knife in, done. Problem solved. Meanwhile, Kelly has decided to do a 3-piece handle. She then talks about sandwiches for a while.
I love this.
I've never really done the 3-piece construction before. That's where you make a sandwich. But there's 3 pieces, so instead of just having bread and bread, I have bologna bread. And so I notch out a hunk in the bologna to stick my knife tang into, and then just make a sandwich. It's pretty straightforward.
You got my attention with sandwich.
Absolutely. As soon as she did this, I was getting to the point as I was watching this where I was more and more pulling for Kelly. And that point, it was like, yep, deal.
Sells it.
It's sold now.
Kelly, I also like sandwiches. I agree.
But what about bologna sandwiches? When's the last time either of you had bologna?
I actually got bologna just a couple months ago.
I'll be damned.
I can still eat it. It's not... When I was a kid, it was like a delicacy.
Oh, it's the best food that ever existed.
So good. I can still eat it occasionally as an adult.
I'd try it again.
Yeah, it's fine.
As Kelly assembles her delicious handle, she grabs some epoxy, but the judges point out that that's a 24-hour epoxy.
Gosh, what a stupid bitch.
That's not going to work out. That's a total disaster. It would just be gloopy for a while. It wouldn't set in a 3-hour time period.
This is Kelly's first real dramatic setback in the episode.
And it's kind of a real one, too.
Right. It could actually present a problem for her otherwise basically perfect sword blade.
And she gets to the point where she's going to squirt those chemicals onto the plate to mix, but seconds before she does, she realizes what she has, and she lets out a big noise, rushes over to get the 5-minute epoxy. Crisis averted. Only this time, it's not averted. She grabs 2 tubes of the same chemical, just the epoxy, not the hardener, and after putting it all onto her blade and waiting a bit, she realizes, oh shit, it's not sealing up, something's wrong. She notices a mistake, blurts out that same big noise, and then rushes off to fix it. And it's fine from there.
Yeah, of course. But again, this actually was a real potential problem. Some of the problems are really more theoretical. Like, if I do these 5 things wrong.
If this doesn't work, my whole thing is ruined, and then
Yeah.
it works, so everything's fine. But when she's waiting for her handle to harden and it doesn't, she goes over and talks to Will.
Chats.
And you can kind of
Yeah.
see the way they're interacting, and she is definitely one of those gruff but nice people, and you can see it in that scene. Her saying, like, I'm waiting for my handle to harden. What are you doing? And Will's like,
Hammer.
Like on the grander scale or today?
In the cosmic sense, I guess I'm just hurtling through space. Blip in this grand scheme of things.
One love. Again, like the camaraderie and the mutual respect. Like everyone that does this, you love the thing I love. And I don't know, really
it's
charming.
pretty cool.
That's another great British Bake Off thing, and that like those contestants help each other, and that is so refreshing compared to, again, you're a total twat, look at me, I'm Gordon Ramsay, fuck off. That's my Gordon Ramsay impression. It's not a good one.
Or again, the Simon Cowell, which is really similar, which is, I don't believe you could carry a tune if you had Arnold Schwarzenegger's beefy arms.
Beautiful. What if Brian Vaughn had Arnold Schwarzenegger's arms? Everything else is the same, but you have those big, burly arms.
The arms would drag him down, wouldn't they?
He couldn't
fall.
get up. He'd be like a turtle.
It'd be like
rolling
trying
around.
to carry that.
It would be really tough because of the percentage of my body weight they would comprise.
Meanwhile, contestant Will is all but done with his knife, so he spends some time cleaning it up and shaping his mermaid handle, as he calls it. Justin is struggling with the pins in his blade because one of them bent. He has very little time left to finish it. He's going to go to the wire.
He's so fussy on those pins.
I respect this about Justin, though. He knows, like, I can't have the handle fall apart. So rather than make it look a little fancier or refine that, I just put more pins in this thing.
He did. Like a pin is supposed to go all the way through. It's brass, and then you shave off the ends, sand it down, and it holds everything in place. He couldn't get the pin all the way through, so he just took another pin and stuck it on the other side.
And
just
it
kinda
worked?
Like that. Oh, it worked out great. Kelly gets her glue finished. Justin finally gets his pins completed, and contestant Will just kind of dicks around. He shaves the hair off his arm, wipes the blade on his boot.
On his boot, yeah. He was so bored.
Also, he picks now to shave his arms?
And not even the right part
No,
of his
it was
arms
the
to
lower
shave.
part.
Yeah, not even the bushels on top there.
With the round finished, it is now time for testing. And first up, Jason Knight is going to run a strength and durability test. He's going to chop into a bunch of coconuts. The goal here is to see if the blade comes apart or if the edge dulls. That's what you're looking for when you're chopping coconuts. Or what do I call them? They're cokes?
Cokes.
Chopping cokes.
Or sea nuts, which I think is also acceptable.
Justin is up first. Jason Knight chops and chops away at the coconuts. But everything stays in place. Justin's knife is fine. Jason's only critique is the handle is not shaped, so it's a little hard to accurately swing, but very minor, and he says, great job.
We get some slow-mo in these
Oh,
the
yeah.
With his
coconut
gritted
chop.
teeth as he's bringing the blade down with full force.
Kelly goes second, and chop, chop, chop. Everything holds up. And since she tapered her handle a little bit, Jason Knight says, hey, that was easy to hold on to.
He looks a little more pleased when he's
Yeah.
cutting those coconuts.
I'm going to use something like this at home when I do this.
Contestant Will is last up, and Knight hacks up a few coconuts. But on the final swing, he kind of looks at the blade a bit, eventually revealing that he can see the tang through the handle, like you brought up earlier, Spencer. And there's not enough tang there to balance the weight of the blade. Obviously, the handle weighs less than the metal of the knife. You don't want to cut that short like he did. You want that to go the whole way through so it feels good and you can
Classic
accurately aim.
tang problem.
Should have told Will and spend more than 10 minutes on it next time.
But overall, all of their knives held up together, so it's on to the next round of testing. This time up, it's the sharpness test, and Doug Marcaida is up as the tester. They've rigged up some rubber water bladders, and visually, this is basically just going to amount to Doug holding a thing and pantomiming slitting someone's throat.
Yeah, it reminded me of the Breaking Bad scene with Gus when he's in the lab.
He kills
and
that one guy.
big, long build up to that, and then he goes behind him and slits his throat. It was disturbing in the sense it reminded me of that.
Justin's blade is up first, and this is the most anticlimactic thing that I've possibly seen on this show. Doug slides the blade across the bladder, and Nothing happens.
You just kind of see a mark in it.
Yeah.
I'm pretty convinced nothing could penetrate it, though.
Watching it bang,
don't
bang,
know.
bang, I'm like, oh, so his blade sucks.
Yeah.
We find out a little differently later.
I don't like this test either because it doesn't show off all of Doug's skills, all of his blade whooshing skills.
Yeah, it's mostly stand in place and slash.
This shows off that Doug could be a good assassin.
Or a good drug cartel runner, chicken man guy.
Maybe he is, we don't know. Doug says the blade does feel good in his hand, but it simply will not cut. This is one of his catchphrases. Your blade will cut.
It sounds like it's too simple the first time you hear it, like that's what it's supposed to do. But then when you realize it's kind of his catchphrase, it's like, oh, I like that.
It's a big deal. It's like, I heard Doug say my
He
blade
said it will cut.
Kelly's up next, and Doug kind of waves it around in his hands a bit before he draws it across the bladder thing. Cuts a tiny bit. Doug says Kelly's blade also feels good in the hand and does kind of lacerate, but doesn't cut all the way through the bladder.
Doug's little waving of the blade is kind of like the foreplay of what he will later do.
Finally, contestant Will is up, and we get the same routine. It doesn't really cut much. It's the same deal as Kelly's in that it lacerates but doesn't cut. Doug also mentions that the handle is a little small. Makes it really hard to control the blade.
Everyone's pointing out Will's handle's not so great.
Will, your completely half-assed handle sucks.
Now the contestants are escorted into this back room with a stump as a tiny coffee table, and meanwhile the judges pile into a soundproof room with the contestants' knives to discuss who gets to move on and who has to, of course, escape in the Siberian, I almost said jungle.
Anti-jungle?
Tundra.
This is where I think we could have used more of the contestants hanging out talking.
Yeah.
Is when they're waiting, kind of talking about how they feel they did with each other and maybe about like their experience with the whatever this is they just did.
And they do that on some episodes. You'll get a little more banter between them. The judges all agree that Kelly's blade was the best, so she is completely safe. They say, no problem, she's moving on. So it's down to Will and Justin as to who will be going home. Starting with Justin's blade, the judges criticize the forge marks still on the blade, which is a big deal, but they do appreciate the handle because it's solidly constructed. Moving on to Will's blade, the judges mostly just complain about the handle, how little tang remains in there. And then they do this thing that they do every episode of Forged in Fire, where the host will ask the judges one by one if they've made up their mind or come to their decision. They'll be like, Dave, have you made your decision? Yes. Doug, have you made your decision? Mm-hmm. Jason, have you made your decision? Yep.
Are there any episodes where someone says no?
I need a little more time. I'm not sure.
Will should really just say, you guys good? And then they say yes, and then we continue.
And also, as happens in real life, too, when you ask someone if they made up their mind, they just say yes, and they don't tell you what that is. You wait for a later reveal.
Moving back out to the main forge, the contestants all line up to learn their fate. Turns out the competitor leaving the forge today is Harry Will.
Good. Get out of here.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
agreed.
Again, it felt like it going in. The handle just even looked so bad. And just the conceit behind it seemed so off.
Dave Baker does explain that the handle sucks. That's the real reason, so just go away. Get the fuck out of here. Will says he agrees with the judges. And you know how this whole time he kept saying, I'm young, that's not a handicap. I'm going to prove myself to these old people. Now he says, I'm young, that's why I failed. You can't have it both ways, buddy.
But no, I have time to get better. I'd like to have my cake and eat it too, which he probably, yeah.
He continues saying he's going to go back to his hometown with his head held high because he'll be the most famous person there.
I laughed out loud.
Yeah.
Amazing. Where is his hometown? I mean, I'm sure he's right.
Chattanooga.
I mean, it's too
Wow.
big. Too big. Like, he'd be pretty famous
the most
there.
famous in Chattanooga.
Yeah, probably whoever plays for the Chattanooga Lookouts. That's probably who's famous there.
Now we've made it onto the final round of the competition. The judges remain perched at their table, but with a bright red cloth covering something on the table in front of them. Host Will, who I can now refer to as Will, because it won't be confusing, explains the next steps in the process and reveals the iconic weapon from history that the contestants will be recreating. He dramatically whooshes the cloth off the table, and beneath it is a shiny curved blade known as the Falcata. Not the cheese, this time. Well, let's listen in as some generic butt rock plays, and Will explains the origins of the Falcata.
The Falcata is a curved chopping weapon with a sharpened point. It was popular in pre-Roman Iberia in what is now Spain and Portugal. It is unknown whether the weapon was created in Iberia or evolved from designs in Central Europe and Greece. Whatever its origins, it earned its reputation as a killer. Employed by Spanish infantry, the Falcata allowed its user to deliver a blow with the force of an axe, while cutting like a sword. Hannibal of Carthage was so impressed by this Spanish blade that he equipped many of his African troops with it. Those armed with the Falcata would rely on speed and agility against the heavily armored Roman soldiers.
the dramatic sword noises and soldier screams.
The sounds of supposedly going into flesh with the swords.
It's so funny. And then all this dramatic talk of battles and wars from
and Hannibal
eons past, and then we conclude all of that, and then we look at Justin and Kelly. Just
Anyway, go home and make that, Kelly.
Also, what if that From Justin to Kelly movie was about these two?
I'd watch that then.
That'd be a lot more interesting than Kelly Clarkson and whoever Justin was.
Probably Timberlake, right?
I don't think so. I think it was some other American Idol person that didn't work out.
Justin Long, the actor. Well, we next get to see the 2 remaining contestants return to their home forge to spend 5 days creating their falcatas. By the way, they changed it in later seasons to 4 days.
Okay, so they're with some of the contestants when they say, that's too long.
They've heeded the word of their contestants. This really is when it does hit home for me as a viewer that you got to have money to do this, because the sheer amount of equipment that they need, and they need land to put it on.
Yeah, Kelly's up first. She's in Oakdale, California, where we see her huge farm with a bunch of horses and a dog with a Walker Texas Ranger badge collar. Pretty cool. She makes a joke about knowing what glue is what here because it's her home and she's ready to roll. She also wears a tank top for the first time, and we get a good look at this woman's huge, powerful
jacked.
arms. I mean, I think she could pick the 3 of us up,
Yeah.
Harris in half above her head. And I don't mean Brian in half, me in half, Spencer in half. I mean all 3 of us at once.
Just all 3.
You mean like the strength test with the fish, except with us? And just
With
pull
Kelly
us
and
apart.
that, yeah.
This is farm strength. I mean, she's out there really doing stuff all day long. I appreciated that both of these home forges seem assembled over time and reasonable in a space that they already have. Like, it doesn't... Next episode, we see something that I was a little more grossed out by.
Kelly says she's comfortable making a falcata because she likes the shape of the blade, and the difficult part, anyway, is going to be getting the decorative stuff right.
Which she nails.
She does. And since she's a farrier, she decides she should do some horse stuff, which this room certainly appreciates. We see her draw a horse, and she bangs out a bunch of stuff, and then holy shit, this horse handle automatically looks amazing.
Yeah.
It's so
I
good.
immediately put down the horse head handle as badass.
Right away here, I'm like, how would you not win having made that?
That's,
like,
the contest is over.
Yeah, if the blades are even kind of close, her handle looks like it was made, again, like, people can do that?
Like
That's
die
crazy.
cast, and she made it by hand.
I'm impressed by just sitting down and drafting the design for it, like at the table with the whatever, I don't know if they have
Parchment
a special
paper or
pencil or
something.
something,
Yeah.
but them actually just sitting down and drawing up the designs is so impressive. And I know I've said that multiple times, but it's just the neatest part about bladesmithing to me is how you have to sit down and dream up this design. It's almost like architecture.
I've talked shit on visors before, but if I was blueprinting out this stuff, put a visor on.
It's kind of cool.
Moving on to Justin's Forge in none other than Cuba, Missouri, a.k.a. a place that is just a few short hours away from here.
I was going to say, where is that
It's
in
east
relation?
of here.
So it's southeast then.
Yes.
Okay.
Justin forges and hammers and draws some stuff, and he reveals that at the end of day 1, he has a pointy metal stick, which is exactly what he wanted. Admirable goals
Good
there,
job,
Justin. Everything goes pretty well for Kelly, and she eventually decides, after perfecting her horse sword, she wants to do some testing. So she duct tapes a big bloody bone to a block of wood and just starts chopping the shit out of it.
It's a cow bone. It's not, Kelly's not some sort of Robert Picton farmer.
Hold on. You say it's a cow bone. How do you know that? Because she said it. Can we trust her word?
I can trust Kelly.
Okay.
I will say this, though. She has all of the skills you would need to successfully murder several people.
That's true.
And a farm to bury them.
Right.
After hacking at the bone, she says the sword kind of sounds weird. It also doesn't cut well. And there are a, quote, couple of little bumps on the edge afterwards. So the soundtrack just turns tense. And she says, this is not good. But it's clearly not really that big of a deal.
So you think the show instructs them like, okay, you're going home to your own forge. We're going to send you a camera crew. You need to make sure there's at least one thing that goes wrong in the course of doing this.
Maybe not goes wrong, but like if something gets slightly amiss, play it up.
They must have some sort of on-set producer to at least say, oh, okay, this is what we need to work with. Like,
we're pushing
run
a
with
narrative
this for
here.
the next 10 minutes and we'll use what works best.
Also, we do get to see her little dog chewing on that bone she was hacking at, which is great. I like to see little dogs.
Anytime we get pets, I'm all for it.
We got more dog in this than we got cat in that Friends episode.
That's right.
That they promised us.
You know what? This is more fun to watch than Friends, whatever.
Sure is. And I mean that. Justin is on day 3, and he's ready to heat treat the blade, and everything goes perfectly well. Day 4, Kelly does the thing contestant Will did with clay earlier in the episode. She put some stuff on the spine of the blade so that only the edge is treated. Goes fine. No problems.
Yeah.
Justin wraps up his work on day 5 and says, although it's a lot of work making a blade that size, since, I don't have all the equipment like Kelly does, for example, it was still fun and worthwhile. He also decides to test his sword, puts a coconut on a stump, chops at it, doing exactly what Hannibal's soldiers did years ago, chopping at cokes.
Once they were done in their home forge.
But the thing he also does is as he chops, he yells, Falcata, which it's true. You have to yell the weapon that you're swinging. You have to yell the name.
Yeah, it actually doesn't count otherwise.
I would make sure to, if I were a medieval soldier or a long time ago, I would be sure that I would base my weapon around what I'd be screaming.
What
in
you
that
can
case.
yell?
Yeah.
Okay.
Alternately, are you able to yell a catchphrase instead?
No, it has to be the
Oh,
name.
man.
You can then yell a catchphrase, like a 1-2, bang,
Lost
bang.
your head there.
Beautiful.
So
Because you
what's
cut
the
it off.
easiest thing to say when you're trying to fight for your life?
Bow staff,
That's the worst. I think it would be mace.
washing pole,
Mace.
parrying dagger.
Someone try to kill me and let me see what comes out of my mouth.
With their blades complete, the 2 contestants return to the forge with their weapons in tow. Kelly brags a whole bunch about her sword, and Justin is just kind of like, I don't know, it worked out okay, we'll see.
Yeah, they both seem to feel pretty good.
I'm not really used to making such big weapons. I don't know. Who knows?
It's time to test the blades. First up is sharpness, and Doug Marcaida is going to take their falcata, spin around a whole bunch, and then hack up some salmon hung by hooks on the ceiling.
This is the main event of the show, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, absolutely it is.
Kelly's up first, so Doug grabs her weapon and kind of twirls around. He false swings a bunch, like, he's testing the angle and the weight of the blades. Like, when I really do it, I'm going to know where that goes.
I gotta say that those silky smooth motions, you can tell this guy knows how to do this stuff.
He's definitely a martial
weapon
artist.
expert, Brian.
It's like
Specialist.
it's almost like when you see a warm-up swing from a Major League Baseball player, you tell the difference. It's like, oh, that's a real swing.
Well, eventually Doug draws back and then whack. He slices all the way through the first 2 fish and almost all the way through the third
Two and a
fish.
half? Good 2.5 fish strength.
So Doug, of course, says one of his 2 catchphrases on the show, Kelly, your blade will cut. And she's delighted.
I was too.
Doug grabs Justin's blade next, and it's really just a repeat of Kelly's. It cuts through the first 2 fish, but not all the way through the third. Justin's blade will cut.
Yeah, I had it in my notes here. Both of them get 2.5 fish.
Is that third fish just tougher than the others? Like,
I think
you'd
it
think
is.
you could get through that third one, too.
Well, instinctually, I would say, like, well, it must be on the user, but it's not Doug Marcaida. He can cut through 3 fish.
The
Tough fish.
absurdity of what these competitions are and then stating the results as if it's commonplace really got to me, too. It's like, it's like saying you got 95% on your math test. 2.5 fish on that one.
Justin, too, when they flashed him after Kelly's is kind of intimidated. He's like,
He's
shit,
worried.
Kelly got 2.5 fish.
And then he doesn't really celebrate after he also gets 2.5 fish. He just looks relieved. Like, oh, I'm not in trouble.
One of my favorite things is, and it was kind of evident with the water bladder test or whatever, is the first contestant who goes
they're
with
scared.
a thing like this, you don't know what's going to happen.
No.
So after it happens, you're like, was that bad or not? Because
Right.
I don't know.
Because there's no Guinness Book of World
Right.
Records for whatever that is.
Everyone looked disappointed with the results on the water bladder
Yeah.
test.
Yeah.
Everyone was like, I failed.
Well, with the sharpness test completed, it's time to move on to the strength test. Dave Baker explains that on the battlefield, Falcata wouldn't just be used for fucking up fish. It would also fuck up other things like swords, armor, shields. So to test the durability of the blade, they're going to hook the swords up to this enormous, frightening chopping machine, which I'm assuming has an AI that might go rogue at some point.
Dave Baker's like, oh, this is my personal torture device I've developed actually to just make knives slice through anything you might attach to it. Do you guys think it's okay that I'm wearing a bright yellow shirt?
He's very colorful.
I know, I really liked it. He's parakeeting around.
So they put the sword into this chopping machine, and it hacks into a wooden shield with metal all over it. You don't want to do that with a sword, so it could do some damage. There's now a dramatic commercial break where Baker counts down, pulls the trigger, but it cuts off before we see the results. Like, he's going to push the button to make it chop, but nope, got to go to commercial.
Yeah, because then we need to come back from commercial and for about a minute rehash everything that just happened.
They pad it out. They do the whole thing all over again where he explains the magic chopping machine and then counts down 3, 2, 1, whap, and then whap, and then whap. They do it 3 times. The machine bonks the shield with the sword, and it's done. Dave eyeballs the sword and says, hey, everything's great, no problems. That's it. We're done. We repeat the same process with Justin's blade. Bonk, bonk, bonk. Dave stares at the blade again and says, well, everything's fine. Nothing broke. Great.
Yeah.
Good job.
This was my big theme of this round, really in general, is both of them do the exact same.
But where Kelly's blade had this cool horse pommel thing that curves around your hand, Justin's is a very, very pointy and just sharp chunk of metal.
What was that? What was the point of that?
Well, it was the sword is supposed to curve around like that.
Yeah, it
but
is.
You're supposed to like not have it be sharp.
I mean, it looks cool if
Yeah.
you're not gonna hold it.
I wouldn't be surprised if this was what a Falcata was like a million years ago, because no one was thinking like, I might accidentally suicide my own wrist. They were thinking battle, destroy, or whatever. But
you know what
not
they're
very
thinking?
practical for a competition show when TV exists.
They were just out there thinking in the heat of the battle, Falcata, chop. Back at the big forge table, it's now time to reveal the winner. But before they do, Will says the judges have something to say to both of them. They occasionally do this where they'll be like, we have to pick a loser. We're really sorry, but, one of you can't win because we can't have 2 wins.
Both of our
I like
episodes are that way.
Starting with Kelly, Judge Jason gushes over the cool horse head and says, hey, this is not only historically accurate, it is beautiful. For Justin, Dave Baker says he appreciates how intimidating the blade Justin brought is. I mean, it's practically a Dale Earnhardt. That's how much of an intimidator it is.
I noticed that he put number 3 on it and Tide or whatever. I don't know what Dale Earnhardt sponsored.
Roll Tide.
Oil, it was a black car. I remember that much. Goodyear, I don't know.
Walmart?
But even though both contestants brought really amazing weapons with them, there can only be one Forged in Fire champion. There's dramatic music, a big pause, and eventually Will says, Kelly, you are the Forged in Fire champion.
There actually is a lot less dramatic pullout on this show than a lot of shows like this.
There's a tad of weight, but it's not much.
No, and it's not manipulative. A lot of other reality shows that I've sampled or seen bits of, there's a little bit of that, I'm going to make you think you won or didn't win, and then I'm going to go the other way. There's none of that here. There's pretty straightforward, which is nicer.
And as is customary, they address the loser before they must surrender their weapon to the judges. This time, it's Doug Mercaida who explains that Justin's big scary hook in the handle, that's why he's been eliminated. They both performed equally as well, but that could be dangerous.
But Justin, your sword did chop my wrist off.
I'm dying.
You both made perfect swords. One of yours was a beautifully ornate horse. One of yours is making me bleed out.
As Justin leaves the forge, he says it was great to compete. He's proud of what he was able to do and wowed the judges. He was like, this was an awesome experience. I loved it. And Will once again congratulates Kelly and reminds her that being champion comes with a check for $10,000. And she's just kind of like,
Yeah,
great.
who gives a fuck?
Because she clearly has some money.
Probably get another horse with that.
I don't know how much a horse costs.
I don't
Probably
either.
at least that.
A couple thousand, I'd bet.
I bet they're a lot.
Dave Baker gushes on her sword, saying it looks fantastic and like it came straight out of the history books. Doug points out that she's the very first female Forged in Fire champion, and she even mentions that she's also the first farrier Forged in Fire champion.
I like
a lot of
how
firsts.
she was equally proud of that fact.
She refers to herself as the first chick champion, which I like too.
Van, you brought up that this is a white male-dominated hobby or craft, so that makes it make a lot more sense. But when I was first watching this and I realized we're in the 3rd season and she was the first woman to win, I was pretty surprised.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's just because there weren't that many contestants.
Right.
I think there were only 2 female Forged in Fire champions.
And they sucked.
In like 9
Because they didn't
seasons.
win, obviously, the other ones, right?
Or 2 that won.
Well,
you
2 that
mean?
won, yeah.
Oh, I
Two
thought you were saying before her there'd been 2.
Oh, no, I don't know how many before. But yeah, in the whole run, they had 9 seasons or whatever, only 2 women have won.
Kelly
And
Beatrix
then someone else.
Kiddo.
With images of Kelly's blade on a stand while fire burns and bellows all around it, the credits roll, and the episode comes to a close. And that was our first experience with Forged in Fire. We'll talk about how we feel about the show as a whole, if we enjoyed it, whatever, next episode. But before we get out of here, is there anything you want to say about this episode in particular, or things that took you by surprise with the show?
I did think it would be meaner-spirited and maybe marketed in a tougher, more kind of adverse, like
a big monster truck.
right, and maybe there would be some more coarse judges and kind of just a different kind of audience in mind. But no, this was a very polite show that really surprised me in that way. I enjoyed watching it, and it went by pretty fast.
I had an easier time with this episode in my selection for who I wanted to win, and I got the payoff at the end with, I'm a Kelly stan. So
Really?
when she pulled it out at the end, it was just a big moment for me. So I was happy about that. The next one, I just didn't know what to think.
See, this time around, I had a thing where I did prefer Kelly, but I liked both of them a lot.
I didn't
so
like Justin that much.
I would have been fine with their winning. Next time felt like a real babyface versus heel.
Yeah,
Challenge to
there's
me.
one that I wanted to win from the second he stepped on screen.
I don't know if I'm going to agree with you on that.
There's
but
also
Well,
one
you're
that
wrong.
I wanted to lose from the second I saw it step on screen, and both of them
I'm
come into play next episode.
I'm excited to get into this.
All right. Well, before we get out of here, go check out our other episodes available on wherever you listen to your
There's
podcast.
so many of them. There's like over 150. Not really.
This is like 113
Yeah,
or
it's
something.
so
There's a
many.
lot.
But it's really like 130.
Yeah, because we have the bonus ones and
Yeah.
Seinfeld
So
Week,
anyway,
that sort of
yeah,
thing.
go back there and listen to that back catalog.
We're up on YouTube, and we're getting some traction on YouTube. We've had a couple hundred views on several episodes, and that's not quite what we get on our standard podcasting download numbers, but it's growing. So go watch us on YouTube, subscribe, all that sort of thing. Patreon.com/Bootu Inc. It's all free. There's bonus stuff on there. And a little bit of a behind-the-scenes reveal. I have fixed our issue with the recording studio in the summer, it being really hot, and we can record in the cool air now.
That's
So
right.
Maybe we'll do a few more bonus episodes in the summer, whereas usually we kind of back off because it's too damn hot.
It's making the process a lot nicer for all of us. The studio's great.
We've almost died several times in the behind the scenes sense, so we never shared with the audience. But yeah, the heat situation could have resulted in, at any given point, one less Boob Tube Boy.
Yeah, but it's great now.
I did want to
great.
tell you guys something, just having completed this episode. Van, Spencer, your podcast will play.